Okay, so let's continue our discussion here with music. We saw kind of how the record companies had organized themselves in such a way to essentially increase price, keep prices artificially high. And of course, we saw the result of that, right? At the exact same time that they're trying to increase prices on things like CDs, you have this entirely new way of listening to music come along, which of course is through MP3s. And of course, you can get these MP3s through things like Napster for essentially for free. So at the exact same time that you're trying to increase your product, essentially the price of your substitute good, which is a fairly good substitute, is basically going down to essentially zero. The only thing it's costing you is really time. And you can see the result of that where you had these large declines in sales. And we saw that in essence what the Federal Trade Commission did was basically come in and say, no, this is no good. You guys are going to have to refund all of this money. So let's look at a related issue, and that related issue is something called payola. Okay. So music is kind of an interesting good in the sense that you have to listen to it to evaluate it. Right? I mean, you actually have to basically, in a way, you actually have to consume the products to basically know what you're getting. It's not like a piece of fruit where you can examine the piece of fruit and you can say, this piece of fruit is good or this piece of fruit is no good. You have to actually listen to the song in order to actually know if it's a song that you want to hear. So what you have here is you've got radio play. Therefore, it's going to be an important way to inform consumers about music. Okay. So what you have here, and you can see part of the problem right here. All right. I'll just give you an illustration of the problem right now. We'll just jump ahead to it. Okay, so this is from 104.7 The Cave. This is their playlist, right? So we can see on here, let's go back. So that says 9:15. Let's see if we can get back to 8:15, right? So here's 8:15 right here. So we've got an Aerosmith song. At 8:30, must have been a lot of commercials, all right? We've got the Allman Brothers. At 8:36, we've got the Beatles. 8:43, we've got Led Zeppelin. Let's hit the refresh on this. Oh, no, we don't have to. 8:54, we've got Van Halen. .38 Special at 8:58. BOC at 9:03. White Snake at 9:08. Heart, 9:14. Can you see the problem? There's not a whole lot of songs. In this 1 hour's time, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 songs. And you can go to any radio station, look at any playlist that you want. You're going to have the very similar issue. So here's the problem. If radio is an important way to inform consumers about music, it has a constraint. That constraint, of course, is time. There's only so many different songs you can play in an hour's time or 30 minutes time or 2 hours time or a day or whatever. Now here's the problem. How can I ensure that my song is going to be listened to? Pay them. That's why it's called payola. So we have here a market, a way, a system set up where that in essence we're going to pay radio stations to play our music, right? And of course the reason that we're willing to do that is because there's only a certain amount of time that we can get songs played, so there's only a certain number of songs that can actually be played at any particular time. Right? And if we want people to listen to our songs and hear our songs and buy our music, we need to have our songs being played on the radio. This actually didn't start with radio, it actually started with piano players, right? Where piano players would receive payments up to $1,300 per song to play certain songs. So you're in a saloon or you're in a, I don't know, store, I mean wherever it is music would be played, nightclub, wherever, doesn't matter, wherever it is. You want to have certain songs played, you want people to buy your music. And of course, at this time, it's sheet music, right? You're going to have to pay the piano player, and he'll just play those particular songs, right? And people get those tunes in their head, and like, oh, that's a really good tune, right? On the radio, this kind of started in the 1950s. And like we said, in essence, it would involve firms paying the music stations to play certain songs. Now, let's think about this, because some of these songs can get pretty expensive. And so what we can have here is a significant barrier to entry for other music companies, right? And so if you can say to yourself, look, we're just going to make up a number here. Let's just assume that it's 10, because that's a nice round number. We can only get, say, 10 songs played in an hour. Right? So we've got our 10 songs here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's guy number 11, right? And these 4, we can pay, I'm making up a number here, $10,000 a song. Right, and this guy right here will pay $8,000, and this guy right here will pay $6,000, and this guy will pay $6,000, and this guy will pay $6,000, and this guy pays $5,000. But this little music company, the most they can afford to pay is only $3,000. So what happens here? What happens here to the song from music company number 11? Yeah, it doesn't get, they don't play it. Maybe it gets played, maybe not. These guys over here can afford to pay a lot, and this acts like a barrier to entry, because if you want your song played, you're going to have to come up to these types of numbers. And if you can't afford that, then you can't get into the industry. You can't get your song played. If you can't get your song played, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's going to listen to it. So what we see here is that these large record companies actually used payola as a means of limiting access from smaller companies. Right? It's a significant barrier to entry that they can actually impose on these smaller companies. Now, problem here, of course, it's basically a form of racketeering, right? It's essentially the exact same thing as the mob boss coming along and saying, you're going to have to pay us for protection. It's essentially the exact same thing in a form of reverse, right? So we have a lot of this done by RICO statutes, are essentially outlawing payola. And it's a very profitable thing. So in essence, what we used to have is we used to have our music companies, our radios, our large music companies, paying our radio stations directly. And sometimes the radio stations, sometimes the DJs themselves, right? But RICO statutes say, hey, that's racketeering, you guys can't do that. So in essence, what the large music companies do now is that they hire an independent music promoter, and they will pay them, and then if the music promoter pays the radio stations, that's a completely different entity. Right? Legally speaking, they're at arm's length. They're a completely different entity. And you can have, these amounts can be quite large. You can have up to $1 million a song. To promote airplay to these radio stations. So in essence, what they'll say is they'll say, okay, George Smith Music Promotion, Inc., here's $1 million. We want you to promote this song by this person. We don't care how you do it. It's up to you. We have nothing to do with what you do. It's not us, right? And this guy says, oh, look, I've got this $1 million. What can I do? I can do all these different types of things. I can do this, this, and this. I, music promoter William Smith Music Promotions Incorporated, or whatever name I used a few minutes ago, I can't remember. I can take this $1 million and I can go to these different radio stations and I can say, here's $5,000, promote this. Here's $5,000, promote this. Here's $3,500, promote this, etc. All right. The king of this of payola was a guy by the name of Dick Clark, and I'm sure you guys have heard of Dick Clark. And what was the name of his show that he had? You guys remember? It was American Bandstand. I mean, you can just go to, I mean, anything. I mean, it can be anything. I just typed in American Bandstand. I'm just typing in into Google. Let's see what we get. '57, Michael Jackson. '75 with ABBA. What do you guys want to listen to? 1950s, Boogie. Let's do Michael Jackson.
How long ago was that? 3 months? 4 months? About 4 or 5 months. It seems like a long time ago. Since that time, they have acquired something that means a great deal, I know, to them, to their families, everybody else. This represents 1 million records sold. They actually have sold 2 million, and they'll get a platinum record in addition to the gold one. Ladies and gentlemen, please greet for their first visit, the Jackson 5.
The first visit, right? So here's the Jackson 5. And of course, they're going to perform. You know, you can go to any of these that you want to. It doesn't matter. Here's 1957.
Do we have your full name and age, please? Jeff Norris, 15.
So people are going to sit there and they're going to dance to this music. They're going to listen to all this stuff. All right. Interestingly enough, what Dick Clark would do is that he would say, if you want to be on American Bandstand, you have to pay, sign over part of your royalty payments from the songs you perform. All right? If you're a new band, right? Because this is a big deal. American Bandstand is a huge thing. I mean, everybody is watching this show. What you would have to do is that if you wanted to be on American Bandstand, you would, in essence, have to sign to have your albums pressed. Right, remember, these are vinyl by a certain company. Now, why do you think Dick Clark would say you must choose this particular company? Because he owns 25% of that company, right? So here is a company that they go out and actually is pressing the records. And he would say, oh, okay, do you want to be on American Bandstand? That's great. Right? If you want to really, really increase your chances of being on American Bandstand, you're going to hire this particular company to press your records, and you're going to hire this particular company to distribute your records. Right? And it just so happened, of course, that Dick Clark owned 25% of that company. Right? And, I mean, there's nothing new about this. I mean, you also had, let's see, what was the name? It wasn't just Dick Clark. You had Soul Train. I wonder if I can get the Soul Train intro. I don't have the slightest idea what this is going to give us. I hope it gives us something that we want. Oh, no, this one looks pretty good. So let's see what this is. Same thing. Just not owned by Dick Clark. Who do you want to pick? Anybody, right? It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing, right? You want your song sung by a bunch of people that don't have their own songs. That's what they're doing. They're all singing particular songs, right? This thing's run by, if I remember correctly, American Idol's 20th Century Fox, if I remember correctly. What songs do you think they're singing, generally speaking? Songs that are associated with 20th Century Fox. Remember, they own all these different types of studios. These are the types of songs that we want you singing, right? Because we know that when people hear these songs on American Idol, oh yeah, that's a really great album. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy that song, all right? I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this. I mean, there's nothing new about any of this stuff, right? So we have this idea of payola, right? When it's not necessarily just radio stations per se. It's also things like American Bandstand. It's things like Soul Train from the 1970s, which was more like Motown and disco. It's American Idol. America's Got Talent. All of that type of stuff, right? What was the show? Star Search with Ed McMahon in the 70s and 80s. It's all doing the exact same thing. It's all a way to get songs heard to promote the music. And when you look at the way that this runs, you can see its effect on the industry. Because as it gets harder and harder and harder to promote new music, 1976. So here is the number of firms with a #1 hit. Okay? So in 1976, you had 20 individual firms that had a #1 hit that year. Okay? So you can go to Billboard 100, you can see who's got the top #1 song for all these different kinds of categories. 1976, you've got 52 #1 hits throughout the week, throughout the whole year, right? 20 of those were by individual firms. 1977, 21. 1978, 14. 1979, 15. 1980, 7. 1981, 9. 1982, 6. 1983, 7. 1984, 4. 1985, 4. 1986, 4. 1987, 4. 1988, 4. 1989, 4. 1990, 4. 1991, 4. 1992, 4. 1993, 4. 2016, 4. Remember, we've got 4 large companies. Responsible for 85%. And then you've got a whole bunch of smaller companies that get this extra 15%. Right? But if you look at the companies, the different studios, that are producing the #1 hits. It's been 4. Remember, it's not just one studio, right? This company might own a whole bunch of different studios. You can't just look at that and say, oh, this one's by Decca Records, and they had the #1 hit here last week, and the #1 hit 2 weeks ago was by Elektra Records, and the #1 hit 4 weeks ago was by Asylum Records. Oh, look, see, it's 3 different companies. Nope. All 3 of those studios might be owned by the same company, right? So we have a system here set up into place that is very oligopolistic in nature. Very, very difficult for new firms to break in, right? From a variety of different ways. Things like American Idol, American Bandstand, Soul Train, right? Payola payments to independent, quote unquote, music promoters so that these particular songs are played on the radio and no other songs are played on the radio. So you've got some factors that have diminished to a degree the power of payola, but it's still a significant factor. So we can have the FCC might issue some new low power radio licenses. All right. So this, of course, can increase the supply of radio airplay, and it may provide some opportunities for new firms to come in. When I was in college, I was a music DJ. I was a DJ for our station, one of the local radio stations there, right? But it was a really, really, really low power signal. I mean, it did not get very far. The thing wasn't going 30 miles out. It would go about 5 to 10 miles out on a clear night, right? During the day, maybe you're 2.5 miles out. It's a really, 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 really small station. And so, because it's a very low power, you're going to have a very small market, right? So, like I said, I mean, I think our reach in the daytime was maybe a mile, mile and a half away, maybe 2 miles, depending on how clear the day was. At night, maybe you could get 2 to 5 miles, right, away from the station. It's pretty small. Webcasting / streaming / radio stations. One of the great things about the internet today, though, is that I don't have to be constrained to listen just to the radio stations in the Springfield market, right? Because I can go online and I can listen to radio stations in San Francisco or Germany or Seattle or wherever, right? Thanks to, in essence, this idea of streaming. But you have some significant legal and political challenges here that are still, to a degree, we're still trying to basically work out. Issues, right? Which is basically, I mean, who's going to, in essence, pay for this infrastructure, right? So, over the radio, when you're playing a song over the radio, how big do you think the royalty payments are? We saw 104.7 The Cave here. They just played the Rolling Stones' Beast of Burden at 9:35. That song's just now done. They've started the next one here with the Cars. How much did the Rolling Stones just make from their song? Played over the radio. Zero. Don't get any royalty payments. when it's played over the radio. If it's played over streaming, though, the companies are saying we want royalty payments for that, right? So what they initially had in the summer of 2003, they had a rate of 0.07 cents per song per listener. Now that doesn't sound like a lot until you start thinking about how many people can be streaming at one time, right? Because you've got competition here with the radio at 0, and you've got competition here streaming being 0.07, right? And in essence, they've made some changes here, and they're still trying to argue about what these different types of streaming royalty rates are going to be. And of course, the 4 major studios want what? What do they want the royalty rates to be? They want the royalty rates to be high, right? Because if there's high royalty rates, how are the smaller people going to compete? Smaller stations / smaller music companies. They're not going to be able to compete. They won't be able to pay the price. In essence, by having high royalty rates and making it so expensive for these smaller stations to stream, there'll be fewer stations. If there's fewer stations, there's fewer, the supply of essentially music has gone down, making the payola payments more important, right? I mean, that's in essence what's occurring. It's just the same thing with everything else, right? Here's the demand, here's supply. If we can restrict the supply, we can go from this price, P1, up here to this price, P2, rather than having independent music producers pay $10,000 to promote a song. Now they're going to have to pay $200,000, $300,000, maybe $1 million to promote the song. Very, very difficult for them to get their song promoted. Don't have to worry about these 15% guys down here. Those 15% guys can do whatever it is that they want to do. All right? And we're still kind of dealing with this. This is not quite settled yet in terms of what these different royalty payments are going to be, or should there be a fixed amount plus a royalty payment? Should there be all royalty payments? What should it be on streaming? Should it be a different price on streaming versus a different price on sales? Should it be a different price on Pandora, which has advertisements, versus a different price on this type of streaming service versus this type of streaming service? So they're still trying to figure all of this stuff out. Now, I think it's very, very interesting that their music companies are so concerned about royalty payments. Because they weren't very concerned about royalty payments until there was lots of competition. And to see that that's true, let's look at how the average singer-songwriter makes their money. So what we have here is we've got a band. They're going to recruit a manager. All right. And this manager's job is to help, in essence, with creative development, and business management. Okay. Have you guys ever watched Spinal Tap? Okay, so in Spinal Tap, and of course it's a fake band, right? Spinal Tap is a fake band, and if you've never watched the movie, then you're really missing out. I mean, you guys got to go watch Spinal Tap. I'm just sorry that you just have to. The Spinal Tap is a band, and there's a manager in there, and his job basically is to manage the company, to go this way, go that way. Here's where I'm going to book you in the hotel. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to do all of this stuff. Here's how I'm going to ensure that you're getting paid. Here's how I'm going to ensure that you have a place to live, etc. Blah, blah, blah. Right? And in the movie, it's funny because the band manager quits because the guy has his girlfriend wants to be the co-band manager or whatever. And she doesn't know what she's doing, and she's completely stupid, and she books him into places like, like an Air Force dance thing or whatever like that. And it's a funny movie, right? The band manager, though, of course, there's a lot of people that are in a band, right? And so you have here a role that is complex and very risky, right? Because if you spend your time managing this band and that band never makes it, then you've wasted your time, all right? So it's complex because the manager has to have several different hats. It's risky because it's not very likely that any one particular band is going to make any money, all right? So managers typically receive a relatively large percentage of gross earnings. So these can be anywhere from 15 to 20% of gross earnings. Not net, gross, right? A huge amount. Typically, you have a 3 to 5 year contract. And in this 3 to 5 year contract, of course, the band has the right to fire the manager if he's not engaging in different things. The manager has a right to quit if the band's not doing particular things, right? Interestingly enough, of course, the manager is going to continue to receive royalties from music that was produced during that time he was managing the band, right? So if I'm managing the Rolling Stones and they release an album, and that album makes a whole lot of money, even though I might not be the manager anymore, I'm still collecting revenues. I'm still collecting royalties from the sale of that, depending upon my contribution, based upon what the contract said, to the production of that album and the promotion of that album, okay? So we have our band here is going to produce a demo tape, right? And this gets shopped around from label to label. Right? And both the band and the label want an extended career with high earnings, right? I mean, that should be obvious. The problem is that this payout is highly uncertain. Because when a label hires a band, 80 to 85% of the time, these bands are never going to recoup their cost. So you have this highly uncertain outcome. This label is going to go out and they're going to hire 100 bands. Only 15% of them, maybe 20, are ever going to recover the cost that they actually put into this band. Okay? So you have a stiff ratio here, which is what this is called. That's very, very high, right? 80 to 85% stiff ratio. You're going to get stiffed 4 out of 5 times. Very, very similar to movies, right? If you're not making music, you got nothing we can sell. So the contracts here that you're going to have are going to be very specific. You must be releasing these number of albums in this number of specific amount of time. Okay? So even if you have a successful debut album, there's no guarantee that albums number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, etc., are going to be successful as well. So, like we said, our album here, our label, wants lots of music released quickly. Right? And which may or may not be conducive to the band, right? They may want to do things a little bit differently. There's another movie that talks about the music industry. It's called That Thing You Do with Tom Hanks. So Tom Hanks is, in essence, there's a small little group of band, and they're, in essence, paying this one guy to promote their music. He puts it on the radio. He becomes their, like, band manager. They pay him. He puts it on the radio, and they're all excited. They're all a bunch of kids. They're in high school, I think. Then the song takes off enough so they get interest from the major labels. The major labels come in, buy them, they promote it, but the major label says, here's what you're going to do. You release this, and now you're going to release it like this. You're going to release it in this format. You're going to do this, this, and this, blah, 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 blah. All right? And they say, we don't want to do that. And they say, look, you're in a contract. Your contract says you got to release your next album within such amount of time. You have to release this song in a Spanish version. You got to release all, and they don't want to do that. Right? And the whole thing kind of breaks down. So what we have here with our label is typically under this that it's also an options contract, and that the label has the option to promote or not promote successive albums. Right? So we have an options contract basically with the label. They are not required to promote or to actually produce the next album. They have an option to produce that or to not produce that. Okay. We will pick it up from here on Wednesday.